Hey, Bartlett, thank you so much for joining us today. You are the general counsel of NetChoice, an organization that's been doing some really great work based out of DC. If you just want to take a few minutes and introduce yourself for our audience and give some background on who NetChoice is and the work that you're doing.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you to you, Tanner. Thank you to Frontier Institute for inviting us to be here. So, Net Choice, we're actually a fairly straightforward organization. We're the center right, the easy way to understand this center right trade association for the tech industry. Gets a little more granular than that, but to the extent that we're talking today, thing to keep in mind is we daily wake up and fight for free speech and free markets online.
That's a beautiful thing. I know that's been a conversation that we've seen pretty much across the nation. A lot of legislatures are uh, debating bills that you guys have aptly titled ID for speech bills. And that's one thing. We've had some proposals here in Montana too. And, my main goal of having you on today was to discuss what those are, where they're coming from, and maybe what we're seeing in other states. So if you want to take it away and unpack a little bit, that would be super great.
Absolutely. And I'll speak in generalities because there does seem to be a shift going on, or there has been a shift going on in the way we view free speech, or at least maybe think about free speech. And what I will say is, I'm reminded. I was just saying this the other day. I'm reminded every day lately of why we have the Bill of Rights. I think we can take a lot of these rights for granted. I'll speak for myself. I can take a lot of these rights for granted until you see government acting in such a way to exactly erode those rights. And they come up with, and we'll probably get into this, but dozens of excuses for why that's the case. But they never seem to wrestle with the notion of, yeah, but it's still protected speech. And so I think what we do, I think the people who stand up for First Amendment, all of the First Amendment, whichever piece is your favorite, ours happens to be communications between people, but is definitely worthy. So, what have we seen happening across the country? We've seen various efforts, already alluded to this, various efforts to erode freedom of speech primarily in one way, and that is through some restriction for some group or other online. Now, the way this has looked in most cases has been pick an age, 16, 18. I think those are the most popular ages we've seen, the ones that have gotten any traction, to say you can't get online if you're 16 or under, 18 or under, unless you have a license to be online, as you said. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like getting approval and proving your age somehow, and or your parent allowing you to do it, which means you then have to prove that your parent is your parent, plus that you are of whatever age it is before you can get online, which leads to all kinds of challenges that I assume we're going to talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the big ones that we hear is, oh, well, it's just for kids to make sure that they're of age to get online. But is that necessarily true? Or do these platforms, whether it's the App Store or social media companies, would they have to be required to look at every ID? Would every person have to submit their ID? Is that practically how this technology would work if we have those kind of government mandates?
Yeah, you got it right. Unsurprisingly, Frontier
Yeah.
Institute and Tanner has it right on the nose. So it's exactly right. So one way to think about where we are is to think about the internet, social media, is being the modern printing press. I actually think people think I'm crazy for this. The printing press changed our world. Social media and online access has done it again, and I feel like we don't even think about how incredible it is, honestly. But we now have the opportunity, not for the one to speak to many, the one editor to tell a bunch of us what we're thinking. We have the opportunity for you or I to go online to say something and then to engage in a broad cultural dialogue about whatever that is. So to me, this is even uh, crazier and more fascinating and then more exciting than the printing press, but it allows for a structure for us to think about the First Amendment rights. And so, just like government couldn't force the folks who were running those early newspapers, the broadsheets, to say something that the government wanted to mandate, they also couldn't stop them from saying things that the government didn't like. And that same rule, surprise, surprise, 250 years later, still applies today. And so that is the structure we're looking at. So then the mechanics is that, okay, so now we set up a system where we want to limit some people, pick whatever paradigm you think most interesting. We want to limit some people what they can see. Well, first of all, what these legislation would limit is already legal. So you are limiting access by someone who is of age to see certain information that is perfectly legal. Think about a news report. Think about the weather, sports. I don't know, whatever it is. You're going to have to prove that you are above 16 or above 18 to access it. Well, what you'll hear often in state houses is, oh, well, but you see, this is just for kids. It says 16 or 18, and the very first thought should be exactly what you said, Tanner, just as a logic exercise. All right, well, how do I know you're 16 or 18 if and I know I look 18 years old, but I am a few years older. And so how do I prove that I am not under 18? Well, I now have to prove just to be able to go to Newsmax or to Fox News or to CNN or to the BBC, whatever it is, I now have to prove that I am over 18. And mind you, in a lot of this legislation, it doesn't say I have to prove it once. It says I have to prove it every time I'm getting online or trying to access social media. One more point. When I talk about going to news sites, it's actually kind of my generation, I guess, narrow, because it turns out that well more than 50% of people now get their news from social media. So they go to Facebook for older people, they go to TikTok or they go to Instagram, and they're going there to find out the news. And so this is no different whatsoever than denying access to 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, access to a newspaper.
Absolutely. Well, and that kind of brings up a really good question that we also hear at legislatures across the nation, including in Montana, is, well, what should we do? You know, there is some probably obscene content that does pop up on social media that isn't necessarily protected speech for minors. So is this a good way to handle that? Are there, you know, other, obviously there's the First Amendment and those kind of concerns there, but is there more constitutionally sound paths to go? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so much to say here. So let me start by saying that unconstitutional laws protect absolutely no one. So the state also spends money and time and gives a false sense of security to parents that something has been done in the intervening time. It takes months or years sometimes for these lawsuits to be cleared. And to date, NetChoice is winning those lawsuits. The Supreme Court has spoken on this issue, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to any legislator that these are unconstitutional attempts. All right, so that's number one. Number two, there are alternate, really good ideas out there, some of which are already in place in states. I'm going to pick the one in Florida because we're starting to see already that it's working.
Hmm.
I believe it officially goes into effect, might be January, or it might have gone into effect over the summer for this next school year. But regardless, some private schools in Florida have already picked up doing what is proposed. And that proposal, or what's now going to be required, is that as part of education in K-12, that kids be required to take a course. I kind of think that like the health courses you or I might have had to take, where we're going to talk about online health. These are my words. It's not necessarily what's in the legislation, but the intent is that. And we're going to talk about here are the risks at being online, because it turns out that the online world is absolutely no different than the three-dimensional world, and that is that all of the bad we see in the regular world, turns out a lot of those awful people are online too. So this is not the online world broadly is not a riskless place. So kids and parents should be educated about what's going to be what kids could run into online. Honestly, they should be educated as to what they might run into. So to your point, could you come across some bad imagery of some sort? Absolutely. And I raised two girls right in the middle of this. So they're older teens, young, very young 20s now. Um, and so right during COVID, when online use went bananas, um, I had to think through all of these items. What do we do? What should be done? They want to be online. They want to talk to their friends. This is the way they socialize. Would have been great if they had had classes like are being required in Florida to educate them. So, stranger danger, for lack of a better term, that they can identify when someone is being a creep online and can shut it down. And by shut it down, who do they go to? When do they go to them? Who all do you complain to? Is it just do you go to your best friend? Do you talk to your parents? Do you talk to the school? Do you talk to the platform? Like all of these are options, way more options than we had when I was in school for when there was that bully on the playground.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important point to make is that we should be educating both, I think, kids on how to be safe online, but also parents. And there are so many tools that are already there. Whether if you want to monitor what your kids are seeing so they're not seeing bad things, there are so many tools available. But the problem with a lot of this legislation from our point of view at Frontier Institute is that when we go to a government and we say, government, we're going to mandate this, then it's like you said earlier, a false sense of safety, where parents think, okay, well, it's all taken care of now. And we really shouldn't be replacing parents with the government because it isn't a false sense. It is a false sense of safety, that is. And it can create some longer term problems. That kind of brings up the court cases too that you'd mentioned. You guys have seen a lot of litigation around these age verification for social media, for online use, app stores, all that kind of thing. How have those been going? Are these bills meeting the muster of constitutional scrutiny, or are they not?
Well, that's easy. And the answer is they're not. So we're involved in 20 different lawsuits in 12 states currently. So far, the results have been what we would expect across the country. So preliminary injunctions and whatnot that stop these laws from going into effect because I'm trying not to use the legal words here, just not to, in case you have a lawyer out there who's going to challenge me on this. But where the courts say, this looks like it might not be constitutional. Let's do more. So we have been met with great success, actually, and expect that to continue. There have been, a minor setback here or there where the court needs more information from us, et cetera, and so we have to refile, and which our detractors love to make a big deal of. But at the end of the day, the Constitution ain't going anywhere, and we ain't going anywhere. And I think it's pretty clear when you write a law that prohibits, like I said, people's access to legal content. Or you can flip it around. Our member companies have rights too. They have the right to publish what they would like, so long as in the bounds of what's legal. So if you start telling them what they can say or not say, you have another problem. So you actually have three levels of problems now that we've illuminated. You have the company, you have adults, and then you actually have kids that supposedly these laws are targeted at. Let me say one more thing on adult that you mentioned on adult responsibility. You didn't say it that way, but I will. I do think parents need to step up. And I think that broadly, and I speak to myself in this same category, right? I'm a parent. My kids are still in their early 20s. They still need parenting, although now maybe looks more like coaching. But I didn't surrender my dad card when they got to be 18, and I probably will go to my grave with my dad card on my chest. So I don't intend to back off anytime soon. And I think if you sit and wrestle with this for a half a second, you realize that I need to put as much effort into the online world as I might into my kid joining a soccer team or going to school in the first place, or whatever it is. And there is a world of options available to parents, not least of which is they don't have to give them a phone at all. And if parents think, oh well, hey, but they need a phone, then dumb phones are an option. And then you can just keep going up the list. I mean, there are parental tools available at I know you're familiar with the tech stack, but for people who might not get that, the very quick is you've got a pipeline that comes into your house, the ISP. It has tools available. You probably have a route. In fact, I'm sure you do. You have a router sitting in your house. There's software on that router, independent of the ISP. It probably has parental controls. The ISP you're actually using, Comcast, Verizon Fios, it has parental controls. The device you're holding in your hand, in this case, the iPhone, it has parental controls. That's all before you end up getting to Facebook in the first place. And then there's Facebook where it has parental controls. So you have tons of opportunities, again, unlike anything our parents had to keep us protected, including your choice in the first place, but all the way through all these levels of protections.
Yeah, which is especially why I like the educating parents and kids about being online because, um, we all know people my generation especially know what a VPN is, and so having these multiple layers of protection for kids who are underage is a great thing that parents are more than welcome to do. One thing that you'd mentioned was these court cases federally and in the First Amendment. And that brings up something that's a little bit of a niche topic, but I think a really important one, which involves strict scrutiny, which is maybe I'll give it to you since you're an actual lawyer to unpack that a little bit. But in Montana, we recently passed the Right to Compute Act. And what we did is clarified that the First Amendment, property rights apply to the digital age. Therefore, when courts are looking at regulations that impact, social media, computing, really anything in the digital age, they should be using strict scrutiny still. It's the First Amendment evolves with us. It doesn't just stay with the original printing press, it goes to the modern printing press. So my question is, do you think, maybe this is an easy answer, but do you think that these are really meeting strict scrutiny? And maybe a little background for folks on what even strict scrutiny is compared to other scrutinies.
Sure. So when you're looking at so first, First Amendment law has a whole jurisprudence around it because the First Amendment has been so important to our republic, and to our history. And what are some examples for folks? So whether we all think of the printing press, right? We think of news services, but also remember that packed in that First Amendment is also our right to redress grievances. So anyone who ever wants to talk to their elected officials without being told what to say or how to say it, that's in the First Amendment. If you are a person who is religious and you want to worship in the way that you deem is appropriate, as opposed to the way the government deems appropriate, that's in the First Amendment. And then just our right to be together as a group of citizens, and whatever that looks like. So you're at the coffee shop, you're protesting in front of the Capitol, et cetera. That's all in the First Amendment. So the First Amendment is given because it has so much, and because it is so many of those ideas, that right encompasses so much of the American ideal. It is given an elevated sense by the courts, and so there are various scrutinies that you won't even necessarily find across a lot of other jurisprudence. And strict scrutiny requires that in layman's words, have you done everything else you can
Yep.
before you get around to messing with First Amendment rights? And then there are a whole bunch of things that we could, if we were on a CLE program,
Yeah.
we could get more in detail. But that's generally it. And so what that means is, in the case of can I shut down speech? I don't even know if I'm going to be able to give you a great example on the fly, but can I shut down speech for an 18-year-old? Must I check their ID before they can get online? One might argue that there are, in fact, we would and we do, that there are easier ways to go about making sure that an 18-year-old doesn't see something illegal than shutting down the entirety of the internet.
Yeah.
Would be one example, admittedly extreme, but it makes the point. So you have to choose, the courts are inclined to urge people to choose something that is less restrictive, whatever that would look like. One thing I don't want to lose sight of here is 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, all kids of any age, they do have a right to access information. So they are U.S. citizens, turns out, and as such, they are given the stunningly similar First Amendment rights that I am. Now, and actually, I could even say they are given exactly the same First Amendment rights with a couple exceptions, and that is all around pornographic or obscene materials. We don't approve that for underage viewing. Kids have no right to see those images, but adults do. And so then onward goes the conversation. And while this seems really complicated, it's at some level in the lawsuits, it's really not. This is pretty straightforward Americana law, right? This is just right in the heart of who we are.
Absolutely. And one thing that Frontier Institute talks about a lot as well is that innovation and American innovation and our domination of innovation globally comes from freedom. It doesn't come from a place of government mandates. It comes from experimentation and letting people crash and burn sometimes with their businesses. And that is can be a scary thing sometimes, but unless we want to sacrifice all of our freedom for moving towards, more authoritarian solutions, then we should probably be careful about our path there. Now, one extra thing that I kind of wanted to highlight too, because it was just in the news on this last Friday. One of the most popular apps in the App Store had a leak, and it's called the T app, and it doesn't really matter of exactly the specifics there, but purportedly they had about 75,000 IDs, government issued IDs, leaked onto the internet because of a data breach. Now, this app specifically is about helping women date safely in the digital age. And that was their whole goal. And we have about 75,000 IDs, home addresses, and photos now leaked on the internet. And I think that brings up another really good question to ask you is there's also security concerns about having to give my personal information, my ID specifically, every time I get on, social media, or if I want to use an app and the slippery slope that might be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And there are a lot of interesting pushbacks in this argument, and I've yet to be convinced by any of them. So I'll try to get to a couple, or maybe highlight them along the way. So we're just going to follow your logic chain again, Tanner. So if we, we've become very accustomed to convenience, right? So let's say that I have to prove my age every time I go on a website. That kind of goes right at the heart of some of our First Amendment claims, and that is that you're really hindering the ability to get to the information. So some of the pushback we've had on that is, oh well, wait, we'll solve that. We will just store the information, and then we'll ping against it, my words, and we'll know you're okay. So Tanner says, oh, I'm going to get on, whatever, WashingtonPost.com. And so they save my information every time I get on there. Not unlike you might do with your password now, you save your password on your computer. They would save it on theirs. And when you show up and say, I'm Tanner and put in whatever, boom, you'd have access to the information because it will look at your driver's license and say that you're of age. Um, that's problematic because now Washington Post has all of your information. And at do we go a day without something being breached? I mean, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but then again, I don't. I mean, I suspect if I was in that space day to day, I would hear of breaches. We hear of the salacious ones. We hear of the big ones. There are smaller breaches. There are government breaches. There, there's no that I know of, there's been no entity that's been completely immune to these attacks. They're done by foreign nations. So they're bringing all that effort against whatever set of servers. I mean, it's really hard for anybody to keep up with that. So that's one. So then I hear, oh, no. We would never have the Washington Post keep that information. Instead, we're going to have a third party keep that information. And that third party will let the Washington Post know that Tanner is A-OK. We have his information here, and now he can get online. To which I roll my eyes. I'm like, well, all you did was move the honeypot. So instead of the Washington Post being the honeypot, now it's ABC Corp. And they have all your information. And then there are actually my very, very favorite pieces of legislation that are kind of all, or were kind of all over the place. I think they still are. And that is, you know what? We hear you. So we're going to tell these companies they can't keep your information at all. And so me as general counsel, I'm thinking, all right, so I let Tanner on. And it turns out that later in some other situation, we find out that Tanner is 17. And I've been allowing him to access all this material. And it turns out that every time I've done that, it's a $10,000, $25,000, $50,000 fine. Why go broke just because of Tanner the ne'er-do-well who posed as an 18-year-old and he was 17? But I go, oh, wait. He gave me a government credential that says he's 18. Oh, let's go pull that out of the file. Oh, wait a second. I was required to delete that file as soon as I looked at it. There is no general counsel on earth that is going to be comfortable with that scenario unless they're held harmless. And that is not the point of these pieces of legislation. So, kind of at every level, every different way to go about this, you have a problem. The major problem is you're looking at a national database for everybody who wants to go online, and certainly if they want to go online routinely.
Yeah, certainly. And I think going back to a good example of this is that most recent app leak with the T app is they originally in the terms and conditions said we will delete your ID after 7 days, or I think we're 48 hours, something like that. It was a short little window. That was years and years and years ago. Turns out they still have all that. And the reason being is that states started creating anti-bullying laws, which is really a noble thing. I understand why we kind of address that, but they needed to have some protection from their liability that, hey, we are checking IDs. These people are adults. And so they were basically had to hold on to all these IDs for years, specifically because that, which is another great illustration. And then my last kind of question is, well, what does this necessarily do to anonymity? A lot of folks are uncomfortable with it. Some platforms choose to not allow it. Some platforms choose to allow it. We definitely had a lot of pseudonyms for our founding fathers in America and their role that they did. Maybe unpack that a little bit too of being able to track people's speech. Is that a concern as well?
The Publius argument, my favorite. Right, people are all over the place, even on the center right, about the right to anonymity. But it's certainly something, whether you consider it a right, which you can clearly get there through constitutional law, or whether you just think it's a good idea, or whether you just accept it as part of the history of this country. To your point, it certainly is important. And it's important to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. It's not, in fact, it's honestly rarely for nefarious reasons. It's often for, I don't want to be discredited because I work at a place that is very filled with one political party, and I want to be able to go online and say things that maybe I don't always agree with that political party, and I might be shamed or fired because of how that company or whatever hears my words. And so, and listen, who wants that? At the same time, to your point, we don't want bullying, et cetera. So there's kind of this tension that goes on. But what we should all be real comfortable saying is, well, what are our First Amendment rights? And we have a right not to disclose, right? We don't. There's nothing requires us to attach our name or even nom de guerre to anything we write and to post. And so I think it's a mixed. It's definitely a mixed bag. It is a mixed bag politically. Um, I think, just personally, I think we should be able to act anonymously. And certainly, I lean way more libertarian that way. I think we should be able to act anonymously generally. But certainly when we're online, because it's frankly too easy to track down people these days, or track down people wrongly. We've seen plenty of misidentification cases too, where somebody gets a name and they run with it, and oops, it's the wrong person, and now I've done all kinds of damage. One thing I'll add to all of this is, I think especially for your audience, and if this is a miss, my apologies, but certainly for plenty of center right people that I talk to, including legislators, there's something about our philosophy in the center right that is a little discordant right now. And but fundamentally, we tend to believe that government kind of messes things up, and that generally others, particularly specialists in an area, can probably come up with better answers and solutions than government. And to the extent that we respect government, it's a lot around very community things. So, like collection of tax to run infrastructure, for example, defending our borders, any number of examples. Uh, but sooner or later, I do think we have to look in the eye if we are on the center right and we think that there should be great restrictions brought against online speech, or even minor restrictions, especially where parents are concerned. How many times do we tell parents that they're not good enough at parenting and government should be in charge before the kids start learning that government is the answer to everything? And then we gnash our teeth when they grow up to do exactly what they've been taught,
Yeah.
which is that they go to government every time there is a tough situation to figure out. I've done nothing harder in my life than raise kids, but I've not been more proud of any accomplishment in my life than raise kids. But if all I did was birth kids and then government raised them, I don't think I'd have any of that particular pride. And of course they would be wards. They would be effectively wards of the state. They would be government trained, and I'm not sure that's a healthy look for. It's not a healthy. Let me just state it affirmatively. It's not a healthy look for our country. I don't think it's a healthy look for the political party that tends to stand on the side of allowing individuals to make decisions for themselves and their families.
Absolutely. I think from a right of center perspective, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid government replacing parents and replacing families and all of those things. And I think those are worthwhile. And there are some difficulties that come with freedom and the things that it address, but we don't do that through government mandates. We do that through more freedom and how allowing people to have the tools and the knowledge to be able to address those things. So, well, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you helping our audience unpack all these issues that are going on. Any last thing to add? Where can people learn more about NetChoice?
Sure, check out our website. Literally everything we do is up there. So if you want to know about any particular lawsuit, if you want to know about any particular position we take on legislation across the country, it's all there at netchoice.org, spelled just like it sounds. The last thing I want to say is if people aren't reading what you are putting out, Tanner, what Frontier Institute is putting out, they must know something because they're watching this video. But I would urge all of them to tell one friend because if people really love liberty, they should share that. And if they all tell just one friend, the liberty movement will take greater hold in this country, and we'll never have to worry about it going away.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said that better myself. Well, thank you, Bartlett. I really appreciate it. Have a great one.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye.